I am Gwen, 36. Every summer, my mama hosts the whole family at her beach house for weeks. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and their kids. But every April, she calls to say there's zero space for me and my daughter. 25 people fit fine. We never do. For 8 summers, I scrolled through smiling vacation photos we were excluded from. I kept the fake peace and told myself my little girl was unaware of the snub. Then one evening last fall, my 8-year-old sat on her bed sobbing. She looked at me and asked the question no kid should ever have to ask. "Mommy, why does Grandma say we aren't real family?" Something permanently broke inside me that night. The quiet, obedient daughter in me finally died. I secretly recorded my sweet child's heartbreaking tears. Then, I found a hidden video on her tablet. A conversation my mom never knew was saved. I brought both to her massive Christmas Eve dinner. 25 relatives were sitting there when I stood and hit play. Before I take you back to the beginning, please hit like and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let me take you back to a time when my whole world was waiting to change. I was 7 months pregnant with Layla. It was April, the month when my mother always made the big summer plans. The family beach house sits right on the edge of Cape Cod. It is a massive, beautiful place. 5 big bedrooms upstairs, a cozy guest suite tucked in the basement, and a wide wraparound porch that smells constantly of salt and pine needles. A wooden dock stretches 40 feet out into the deep, dark water. I learned to swim off the very end of that dock. I caught my first little flounder there when I was just 10 years old, my dad holding the plastic bucket while I screamed in terrified joy. That house holds every single good memory I have from my childhood. So, when my phone rang that April, I smiled. My ankles were swollen, my back ached, but I was already picturing my little girl splashing near that same wooden dock someday. Then my mother spoke. Her voice had that careful, soft, apologetic pitch. It is the exact tone she uses when she has already made a final decision, but she wants you to feel like she is just offering a helpful suggestion. "Honey," she sighed, "the house is completely packed this year, and with you being 7 months along, the drive is just so long and bumpy. Maybe next year." I touched my round stomach. It hurts a little, but she's right. I said okay because it made logical sense. I was heavily pregnant. The drive was tough. Sure, we would go next year, but next year came. The baby is so little, Gwen. All that noise, all those people. It wouldn't be fair to her. Then the summer after that. Aunt Rose is bringing her whole crew this year. We literally have 0 room. Every single April, my phone would ring. Every April, before I even answered, I already knew exactly what she was going to say. 8 summers passed. 8 different, carefully crafted excuses. And every August, I would sit alone on my couch, scrolling through Instagram, letting the blue light wash over my face. I would look at the bright, happy photos, everyone laughing wildly on the dock. My sister Bella's kids wearing bright orange water wings. My cousin Tyler happily flipping thick burgers on the grill. It was the picture-perfect family, -2. Bella was always there. Her husband, her 3 loud boys. They always magically had room. Deep down, I knew the real reason. I had known it since the very first day I brought my husband Mason home to meet them. But knowing a terrible truth in your heart and actually proving it out loud are 2 completely different things. The hardest part was not even being left out. The worst part was finally discovering what my mother had been telling everyone else while I sat at home. I called Aunt Rose one chilly November afternoon just to catch up. Rose is my mom's younger sister. She has a sharp tongue and is deeply honest, the kind of person who makes holiday dinners very interesting. Halfway through our breezy chat, her tone shifted. "Gwenny, I am so glad you are finally reaching out," Rose said softly. "Your mom said you have been so incredibly busy lately that you just don't want to come around us anymore." My breath caught in my throat. I went completely quiet. "What?" Rose kept talking, unaware she was crushing my heart. "She said you told her you had your own separate life now, that the beach house just wasn't your thing anymore." I never said that. I never said a single word of it. My mother had quietly built a whole story. She didn't create a massive, dramatic lie that would have made people ask questions. She built something small, quiet, and perfectly believable. Gwen is just too busy. Gwen has moved on. Gwen prefers her own space. She delivered these lies to the family wrapped in sad sighs and soft shrugs. I invite her every single year, she would tell them. She always says no. What am I supposed to do? Beg? My hands shook, but I tried to fix it. I called my mother directly. I forced my voice to stay steady and calm. Mom, I just talked to Aunt Rose. She thinks I don't want to come to the beach house. That is not what happened. There was a heavy, dead silence on the line. And then, right on cue, the tears started. My mother can cry on command the exact same way other people can blink. Gwen, are you attacking me? Are you blaming me for this? She sobbed, her voice trembling perfectly. I have done everything I can for you. You are the one who is pushing us away. Later that same night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my sister, Bella. Mom says you screamed at her on the phone today. Are you okay? You need to calm down. I stared at the glowing screen. I didn't scream. I hadn't even raised my voice by a fraction. But that was exactly how my words landed. They were twisted and filtered through my mother's fake tears, reshaped into a weapon that made me look like the angry, unstable problem. I realized then, with a sickening drop in my stomach, that I was losing a bitter war I didn't even know I was fighting. And she wasn't just fighting me, she was erasing my family from existence, one whispered lie at a time. Mason and I sat in the dim light of the kitchen after our daughter Layla was finally asleep. The house was dead quiet, but my mind was screaming. I poured out everything. I told him about the gut-wrenching call with Aunt Rose, the fake tears from my mother, and the stinging text from my sister. Mason sat perfectly still, listening to every broken word. He slowly rubbed his jaw, a habit he has whenever he is carefully choosing his next sentence. Okay, he sighed heavily, his dark eyes locking onto mine. So, what exactly do you want to do? I want to fight, I thought, my chest burning. I want to rip the mask off her face. I want to drive straight up to Cape Cod next August and walk right through that front door, I whispered fiercely. Mason shook his head sadly. And then what happens, Gwen? Your mother denies everything. She cries on command. She calls Bella. Suddenly you are the crazy villain all over again. He wasn't wrong. It was a sick, endless pattern. Mason grew up in a loud Chicago neighborhood with a massive family, strong opinions, and plenty of bitter drama. He had seen firsthand what happens when grown adults turn innocent children into weapons. His own aunt and uncle had fought so viciously over a piece of family property that his young cousin completely stopped speaking for a full year. Mason carried that heavy sadness with him every single day. I refused to let Layla grow up thinking her grandmother's house is a toxic war zone, he said softly, reaching across the table to grab my shaking hand. She is only 4 years old. She doesn't understand any of this ugly mess yet, so we just keep taking the disrespect? I asked, a tear finally slipping down my cheek. No, he replied firmly. We wait until it truly matters. We wait until it touches our daughter directly. I absolutely hated that answer, but deep down I understood the painful logic. My mother was incredibly cruel behind locked doors, yet completely flawless in public. Without solid proof, real, undeniable, hard proof, I was just a jealous daughter complaining about nothing. Every family has one of those, right? So, I made a silent vow in the dark. I would wait. I would keep my safe distance, protect Layla from the hidden ugliness, and hold my breath until there was a reason large enough to shatter the glass. I am doing this for her, I kept telling myself, to keep her safe. I didn't know the heartbreaking reason would eventually come straight from Layla's own mouth, and I had no idea it would take 5 more agonizing, lonely years to get there. That warm summer, my sweet girl turned 4. She blew out the bright candles on a pink unicorn cake. She didn't ask a single question about the big beach house. She didn't ask where her grandma was. Not yet. But Layla started 3rd grade in late October. That was the exact moment the ground beneath us began to crack. She would skip home from school, happily chattering about her classmates and what they did over the long summer break. Chloe went to her grandma's cozy cabin, she would say. Jackson stayed at his grandpa's farm for a whole month, Mom. She told me these normal things casually, swinging her heavy backpack onto the kitchen counter. She had no clue she was handing me a live grenade with every happy story. Then, one chilly evening, she looked up from her dinner plate, her big brown eyes full of innocent curiosity. Mommy, why don't we ever go to the beach house? My throat instantly tightened. I forced a gentle smile. Grandma's house is very small, honey. It gets too crowded for us." She accepted the weak excuse and went back to eating. Kids always believe you for a little while. Then her sweet teacher, Mrs. Peterson, called my phone. She used that overly calm, careful phrasing, the gentle voice teachers use when they are desperately trying not to panic a parent. "Mrs. Winslow, I just wanted to quickly check in," she murmured. "Layla drew a beautiful family portrait in class today. But it is just the three of you. Her, you, and her dad." When I gently asked about the rest of her family, she told me she doesn't have any grandparents on your side. I pulled my car into the empty school parking lot after pickup. I sat there for 15 full minutes with the engine humming, my white knuckles gripping the steering wheel. She thinks she has nobody. My beautiful daughter was 8 years old, and she had already swallowed the toxic message my mother never even said to her face. My mother had broadcast her rejection through total absence, through chilling silence, and through a heavy wooden door that never ever opened for us. The fake peace I thought I was keeping was actually rotting right underneath our feet. Layla had been breathing in that poison without either of us noticing the damage. A week later, another mom from the school approached me softly. "Layla mentioned she doesn't have grandparents on your side," she whispered. I hope I'm not overstepping. My heart shattered into a million pieces. My silence wasn't a protective shield. It was a terrible lesson. And my innocent daughter was learning the absolute wrong one. But I had no idea the worst blow was already hiding inside our own house, just waiting to explode. My mother video called every couple of weeks. It was never often enough to be an actual, loving grandmother. It was exactly enough to strictly maintain her flawless public appearance. If any nosy neighbor ever asked, she could happily declare, "Oh, I Skype with Gwen and my sweet grandchild all the time." It was a perfectly designed performance. A cheap magic trick meant to fool everyone but us. She just wants the credit without doing the work, I would think bitterly, forcing a tight, fake smile at the camera. Then came a muggy Tuesday evening in the middle of July. My phone rang while I was standing in the hot kitchen, aggressively chopping ripe red tomatoes for dinner. The thick air smelled strongly of garlic and olive oil. Layla, eager and bright-eyed, quickly grabbed the glowing tablet right off the speckled counter. She happily swiped the green button to answer, and carried the screen away to the soft living room couch. I could vaguely hear them talking over the loud humming roar of the stove's exhaust fan. I heard Layla's high, sweet voice chiming happily. Then my mother's measured, perfectly controlled tone answering back. I couldn't make out the actual words. I should go check on them, I thought briefly, but the sauce was bubbling over. I stayed at the stove. I was just feet away, completely blind to the fact that my child's heart was being quietly dismantled. Layla didn't tell me that night. She didn't whisper a single word the next week, either. It took 3 agonizing months for those toxic words to settle deep into her tiny bones, until they finally cracked through her spirit. But here is what really happened on that sunny July evening. Layla looked at the screen, her chest full of hope, and asked, "Grandma, can I please come to the big beach house this summer?" A heavy, suffocating pause followed. It was the brutal kind of silence that fills a room, even through a digital screen. Then my mother adjusted her posture and dropped the blade. "Sweetie, the beach house is for our family. You know, real family." Layla didn't cry. Her little brain couldn't process the sudden cruelty from someone supposed to love her unconditionally. She didn't scream or argue. She was only 8. She just blinked her wide eyes at the bright screen, swallowed her hurt, and politely whispered, "Okay, Grandma." The digital call ended completely normally. My mother casually asked about school grades. Layla quietly showed her a colorful crayon drawing. I finally walked in for the last 3 minutes, wiped my messy hands on a towel, waved cheerfully, and said hi. Everything looked perfectly fine. If only I had known. What none of us knew, not me, not my cruel mother, and certainly not little Layla, was that my daughter had accidentally triggered the screen recording feature right before the call started. She hadn't meant to secretly spy. She explained it to me later with such heartbreaking, pure innocence. "Grandma looked so pretty in her shiny blue shirt, Mommy. I just wanted to take a nice picture to keep, but my finger hit the wrong button." The hidden control center had dropped down. The tiny red dot started blinking. Layla just confusedly swiped it away, leaving it silently running in the background. The entire crushing conversation was flawlessly captured. Crystal clear audio, perfect video, time-stamped and permanent. Because our household shared a connected iCloud family account, that massive, devastating video file quietly synced itself over our home Wi-Fi. It locked itself permanently into our digital history. That exact file sat hidden in the folders on Layla's tablet for 3 long, oblivious months. It was a quiet little bomb, just ticking away in the dark beneath colorful game apps and cartoon shows. I wouldn't discover it until a chilly October night. The exact night my sweet daughter finally broke down and asked me the one shattering question that changed our lives forever. I thought the ugly secret was safely buried, but the explosion was already racing toward us, and it was going to rip our entire world apart. After Layla finally cried herself to sleep, I crept downstairs. I sat alone in the pitch-black kitchen, pressing my icy hands flat against the cold wooden table. I stared blindly into the dark. She actually did it. She crossed the final line. I reached for my phone and dialed Mason. He was hundreds of miles away on a busy work trip in Dallas, but he answered immediately. I poured out the nightmare, my voice shaking over the line. A long, heavy silence stretched between us. I could hear the faint hum of his hotel air conditioner. When he finally spoke, his tone was entirely different. The usual peacemaker was gone. "She said that to our daughter," he murmured. It wasn't a question. It was a firm boundary being drawn in the sand. "I am completely done being the bigger person, Gwen. She targeted our child." The next morning felt surreal. Golden sunlight spilled across the breakfast table, mocking the storm raging inside me. I made Layla's favorite, warm waffles with fresh blueberries sliced perfectly in half. I kept my posture relaxed, making sure my voice sounded light, as if this were just a casual morning chat. "Layla, sweetie," I began carefully. "Can you tell me again exactly what Grandma said on that video call? I just want to make absolutely sure I understand." She nodded innocently. She repeated the exact same cruel phrases, pausing in the very same spots. While she spoke, my hand hovered under the table. My phone screen was facing the floor, the voice memo app silently recording every syllable. "I hate doing this," my brain screamed. But I wasn't setting a wicked trap. I was desperately forging a shield. For 8 agonizing years, I had fought a ghost. Now I needed solid proof that I wasn't crazy. On that audio file, Layla's tiny voice sounds brave at first, but then it tragically wobbles. She said, "Real family, Mommy." She sniffled on the playback. "Like we are just pretend." I listened to that devastating recording 3 separate times after the school bus pulled away. Each replay struck a different vital organ. The first hit my chest, stealing my breath. The second punched my stomach, making me deeply nauseous. The third struck somewhere right behind my eyes, blurring the entire kitchen through hot, angry tears. Desperate for a distraction, I grabbed Layla's abandoned tablet from the counter. A colorful puzzle game was still running. I swiped up to close the app, but my finger froze. A tiny red screen recording icon was sitting right there in the top corner. No. Wait, could it be? My heart hammered against my ribs. I quickly opened the main photo gallery, searching the video folder for any accidental screenshots, and there it was, a massive save digital file dated July 15th, 25 full minutes long. With a trembling thumb, I pressed play. The bright screen showed my mother's familiar living room, slightly tilted because Layla had propped the device against a couch pillow. Then the undeniable truth poured out of the tiny speaker. My mother's voice was crystal clear, ringing like a Sunday church bell. "Sweetie, the beach house is for our family. Real family. Your daddy is different. You understand, right?" My knees gave out. I sank hard onto the kitchen floor, clutching that tablet to my chest for what felt like hours. I hadn't secretly recorded my daughter to build some legal case. I only did it because I desperately needed someone, anyone, to finally believe my side of the story. Now I possessed something infinitely more powerful than blind belief. I possessed my mother's own unmistakable voice. Still, a tiny foolish part of my heart wanted to give her one final chance to be honest. I offered her one last open door. Saturday evening arrived. Mason was safely home, and Layla was happily distracted at a neighborhood playdate. I stepped out onto the breezy back porch, watching the neighbor's silver sprinkler arc across the green lawn, and dialed my mother's number. She answered cheerfully on the second ring. "Gwen, how are you doing, sweetheart?" "Mom," I started, my tone dead flat. "Layla told me what you said to her on the video call back in July." Total silence on the line. 1 agonizing beat. 2. What on earth do you mean? She asked innocently. She told me you said the beach house is only for real family. That Mason is different. Those were your exact words. Gwen, I never ever said that, she gasped. Layla must have completely misunderstood me. You know how little kids are with their imaginations. Mom, I am asking you one single time, I interrupted harshly. Did you tell my daughter she does not belong to this family? Her breathing instantly changed. The rhythm grew shorter, much faster. Then came the practiced pivot, as smooth as a veteran stage actor shifting scenes. You are always making absolutely everything about race, she snapped viciously. Gwen, this is exactly why I cannot talk to you normally. You twist every innocent comment. Then, right on schedule, the dramatic sobbing began. You are trying to turn my precious grandchild against me after everything I have sacrificed for this family. Mom, yes or no? I refuse to sit here and be violently interrogated by my own ungrateful daughter, she shrieked. Click. The line went dead. 45 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. It was Bella. Mom is incredibly upset, my sister scolded instantly. She said you falsely accused her of being a terrible racist. Gwen, seriously, come on. Did she actually tell you what she whispered to Layla? I challenged. She said Layla got confused about something minor. Kids do that, Bella dismissed quickly. Okay, Bella, I breathed out, ending the call. I sat alone on the cold porch step. The neighbor's silver sprinkler was still hissing, swinging rhythmically back and forth. I had offered my mother a wide-open door to the truth. She slammed it shut right in my face, and then she immediately called Bella to nail the wooden frame permanently shut. She thought she had successfully buried the truth forever. But she didn't know I was quietly holding a match, and I was finally ready to burn her entire fake kingdom to the ashes. Those 10 long weeks waiting for Christmas Eve were an absolute, suffocating nightmare. Every single morning, I woke up with my heart pounding violently against my ribs. I wanted to burn everything to the ground immediately. I wanted to scream the ugly truth from my front porch. But Mason held me steady. He anchored my raging storm. We had a dangerously close call in late November. The local town church was hosting a cozy Thanksgiving potluck. The air inside the bustling parish hall was thick with the comforting smells of roasted turkey, sweet cinnamon, and fresh bread. We only went to drop off a tray of warm rolls. But my mother was there, reigning over the lively event in her absolute element. The second she spotted us near the doorway, she abandoned her friends. She marched straight across the crowded room with her arms flung wide open. She was putting on an award-winning performance of The Best Grandma in front of Pastor Carter and half the smiling congregation. She bent down and dramatically hugged Layla. Oh, look how big my sweet, beautiful girl is getting, she cooed loudly, making sure everyone heard her overflowing affection. My blood instantly turned to freezing ice. My hand was shoved deep inside my coat pocket, my fingers fiercely gripping the hard plastic of my phone. My thumb was literally hovering right over the glowing play button of that saved audio file. The church speakers were right above us. I could end her fake reign right now, my mind screamed. I could let everyone hear the monster hiding behind that bright smile. But Mason quickly stepped right in front of me, blocking her view. He placed his large, warm hand firmly over my pocket and leaned down to whisper directly into my ear. Not here, he murmured, his voice a low, warning rumble. Not where she can easily play the weeping victim in front of 50 confused strangers. Give her enough rope, Gwen. Let her hang herself right in front of the entire family. I swallowed the burning lump in my throat. I slowly pulled my empty hand out of my coat. I flashed my mother a dead, empty smile, and we walked away into the freezing night. But the ultimate breaking point, the sickening moment that permanently locked my resolve, happened just a week before the big holiday. I had taken Layla to the glowing town square to admire the sparkling winter lights. The air was crisp and magical. Suddenly, we bumped into Bella's 14-year-old daughter, Chloe, my mother's chosen golden teenage grandchild. Chloe was casually holding a steaming cup of hot chocolate, looking down at my sweet Layla with that unmistakable, inherited superiority. Are you guys finally coming to the beach house this summer? Chloe asked smoothly, not even waiting for a real answer. Grandma just had the massive corner room fully repainted just for me. She says it is exclusively mine now. Layla didn't say a word. My little girl just stared down at her winter boots, her shoulders sagging under the weight of a cruelty she couldn't fight. That was the exact second the final puzzle piece clicked into place inside my brain. Bella wasn't foolish. Bella wasn't ignorant. Bella knew everything. For 8 long years, my own sister had happily let my mother exclude us because our absence meant more physical space, more devoted attention, and more expensive perks for her own privileged kids. The toxic poison wasn't just staying with my mother. It was rapidly seeping into the next innocent generation. Christmas Eve was finally approaching, and for the very first time in almost a decade, I calmly told my mother I would be attending her famous dinner. Her reaction to my sudden acceptance was a sickening masterclass in manipulation. "Oh, Gwen, I am so completely thrilled. I have been praying for this. Let me call and tell everyone right away. They will be so overjoyed." Within 3 short hours, she had actively dialed half the family tree. I knew this because Aunt Rose called me later that same chilly evening. Rose's voice carried a completely different texture than my mother's fake joy. There was something raw and hesitant hiding underneath her pleasant greeting. "Gwenny, I am truly happy you are coming. I really, really am." Rose started softly. Then a heavy pause. "Your mom said you have been secretly wanting to come back for a while now. She said that you two finally sat down and worked things out. Is that true?" I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling a fresh wave of deep disgust wash over me. Even my simple attendance is being heavily narrated and controlled for me. "Aunt Rose," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, "I know exactly what she told you about me being too incredibly busy. I know she said I didn't want to come around anymore." Rose went deadly quiet on the other end. "None of it was true," I finished firmly. "When? What really happened?" Rose pleaded. I desperately wanted to tell her everything. The explosive words were right there on the tip of my tongue, fully loaded and ready to fire, but I forced myself to swallow them back. If I told kind-hearted Rose tonight, my mother would somehow find out before the dinner. She would panic and cancel the entire event. She would fiercely rework the tragic story. She would have weeks to expertly spin a brand new, believable version of events where I was the bad guy. "You will understand very soon," I promised gently. Rose let out a long, shaky breath. "All right, I trust you." Late that night, Mason and I went over the final plan. I carefully saved both damning audio files directly to my phone and securely backed them up to the digital cloud. I paced through the quiet house, testing the speaker volume. I played the toxic recordings in the dark living room, then inside the tiled bathroom, and finally standing in the center of the kitchen, carefully listening for crystal clarity in different open spaces. Mason stood quietly leaning against the doorframe, watching my intense preparation. "Are you absolutely sure about doing this?" he asked softly. "She has had 8 undisturbed years of loudly telling her fake version," I replied, staring down at the glowing screen. "She has hijacked every single holiday, every private phone call, and every whispered family conversation. I only get one single chance to clear my name. I am not wasting it." He nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't try to talk me out of the storm. We didn't breathe a single word to anyone else. Not to guilty Bella, not to worried Rose, not to a single living soul. The trap was completely set, the bait was placed, and the beast was finally going to corner itself. 3 weeks before the big night, the phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice dripped with artificial sweetness as she babbled endlessly about the holiday menu. She spent 14 exhausting minutes detailing the intricate seating chart, bragging about her special roast beef marinade, and debating whether to use Aunt Martha's vintage linen or the everyday cotton tablecloth. It was a perfectly calculated performance to establish absolute control. Then, right before hanging up, her pitch suddenly dropped half a register into something sharp and warning. "Gwen, I need you to promise me something." "What's that?" I asked flatly. "Please do not make things uncomfortable tonight. You know how stressful family gatherings can be. Just don't bring up any old issues." "Old issues," that is what she calls breaking a little girl's heart. "Like what, Mom? You know exactly what I am talking about." She pushed, her tone hardening defensively. "I am bringing the potato salad," I replied coldly. "That is absolutely all I am bringing." She didn't laugh. "I just want a perfectly nice Christmas Eve. That is all I have ever wanted." 4 anxious days later, Bella dialed my number. She used the exact same cautious tone, clearly reading from the exact same invisible script, just with a slightly different delivery. "Mom is genuinely worried you are going to cause a massive scene," Bella scolded. "A scene," she repeated, heavily emphasizing the words. She said you have been acting so incredibly hostile lately, and she absolutely does not want any ugly drama in front of the kids. I gripped the kitchen counter. Bella, I haven't spoken a single word to Mom in 4 weeks. How on earth am I being hostile? Bella didn't have a logical answer for that. She just breathed heavily into the receiver. I am bringing salad, Bella. Relax. The night before Christmas Eve, the air in our house was thick with unspoken anxiety. Mason found me lying in our dark bedroom, wide awake, staring blankly at the ceiling shadows. You aren't sleeping, he observed softly, stepping into the room. No. Having second thoughts? Never, I whispered. I'm just thinking about the dining table. I am mapping out the seating. He raised a dark eyebrow. What do you mean? She will purposely put us at the very end of the table, in the farthest corner, completely away from the center of attention. She always meticulously controls the geography of the room. Mason lay down gently beside me, pulling the heavy blanket over us. Let her. I know, I breathed out, closing my burning eyes. It doesn't matter where I am sitting. It only matters what I am playing. He reached over in the dark and took my trembling hand. Are you absolutely sure about this? He asked. It was the exact same question as before, but it carried a completely different, heavier weight now. I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life. Outside, the first bitter December frost was settling over the dead grass. It was incredibly quiet and still, the kind of biting cold that turns everything brittle and fragile. My stomach twisted into tight knots as we finally pulled up to the massive property. The long driveway was already jam-packed, 8 vehicles total. I spotted a dusty minivan with a Penn State bumper sticker, Tyler's rugged truck, and my mother's spotless silver Lexus parked closest to the front door, right in the undisputed Queen's spot. Mason killed the engine. In the back seat, Layla nervously unbuckled her seatbelt. Is this Grandma's house? She asked, her tiny voice trembling slightly. Yes, baby, I answered, trying to sound brave for her. It's really big. It was enormous. A gorgeous 3-story colonial with that famous wraparound porch. Large bay windows were glowing warmly with amber light from the inside. There was easily enough room to comfortably host 25 people tonight. Yet, somehow, there was never a single inch of room for us in August. My mother met us right at the heavy front door. She was armored in full, flawless makeup, wearing expensive pearl earrings and a spotless festive apron she had clearly never actually cooked in. It was a purely decorative part of her grand costume. Gwen, she flung her arms wide. I am so incredibly glad you came, sweetheart. She pulled me into a tight, suffocating squeeze. Her signature perfume was absolutely overwhelming. Thick, floral gardenias layered so heavily I could practically taste the poison on my tongue. Then she slowly looked down at Layla. For one fraction of a second, something dark and guilty flickered across my mother's perfectly powdered face. It was quick, ruthlessly controlled, and instantly gone. She bent down gracefully. Hi there, sweet girl, she cooed. Layla didn't smile back. She just stepped backward, pressing her tiny body firmly against my leg for safety. Inside, the enormous house hummed with vibrant, joyous life. Overlapping voices echoed down the grand hallway. Excited kids were running in circles, while a classic holiday movie blared from the massive living room TV. I immediately spotted Aunt Rose standing by the crackling fireplace. Uncle Lenny was happily carving something at the kitchen counter. Cousin Tyler was carrying a huge bowl of steaming sweet potatoes like a football. Rose spotted me first and quickly crossed the crowded room. Gwenny, my God, it has been absolute ages. She hugged me, a firm, real, desperately tight embrace. Then she stepped back and studied my face the way people do when they are frantically searching for a hidden truth. I'm okay, I lied smoothly. She didn't look convinced at all. As we slowly moved through the crowded living room, my eyes scanned the decorated fireplace mantel. Dozens of shiny silver and gold family photos lined the wooden shelf. There was the entire crew at the beach house from last August, a group shot from Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Bella's 3 boys smiling brightly at Easter. I scanned the entire length of the wood. Not a single frame held my face, or Mason's, or Layla's. We had been completely erased from the history of this family. 25 blood relatives were laughing and eating in this beautiful house, and not a single one of them knew the sickening reason why we had truly been missing all these years. Dinner was officially served at exactly 6 o'clock. My mother presided triumphantly at the head of the impossibly long table. My quiet father, Kevin, sat at the absolute opposite end, as useless and silent as a decorative bookend. I was seated exactly where I had predicted hours ago, shoved in the far corner right next to the drafty kitchen doorway, 3 full chairs away from the nearest aunt. Layla sat quietly between Mason and me. She poked nervously at her slice of beef, silently watching the loud cousins she barely even knew tossing warm dinner rolls across the table. My mother ran the lively conversation like a ruthless orchestra conductor. Every funny story, every charming anecdote, every sudden burst of roaring laughter, she aggressively orchestrated all of it. And tonight's primary theme, apparently, was the beach house. "Lenny, please tell everyone about that massive bass you caught in August. It was absolutely enormous." She beamed, clapping her hands. "And Tyler, do you remember when your boys accidentally tipped the green canoe? We all laughed for 2 solid hours." Each joyful sentence she spoke was a shiny postcard from a beautiful vacation we were never ever invited to. It was deliberate. It was a psychological game, and she was thoroughly enjoying my silent pain. Underneath the heavy tablecloth, Mason tightly squeezed my shaking hand. I squeezed back, anchoring myself to reality. Suddenly, Aunt Martha, 72 years old, with soft white hair and a voice like warm gravel, turned her gentle eyes toward me. "Gwen, honey, why don't you ever come up to the beach house with us anymore? The kids ask about you and little Layla every single summer." The deafening table noise suddenly dimmed by a sharp fraction. A few curious heads turned in my direction. Before I could even open my mouth to answer the innocent question, my mother seamlessly stepped right in, smooth, automatic, and deadly. "Gwen has her own busy life now, Martha. We have to completely respect that," she said the vicious lie while looking directly into my eyes, flashing a brilliant, loving smile, acting as if she were doing me a massive, protective favor. Uncle Lenny frowned, shaking his balding head. "Diana, you really should make more room next year. This family just keeps growing." "We try, Lenny," my mother sighed dramatically, playing the exhausted matriarch. "But space is what it is. We only have 6 bedrooms." I stared at her perfectly painted lips, realizing with sickening clarity that she truly believed she was invincible. But she didn't know I had the ultimate weapon to destroy her fake reality sitting silently in my back pocket. I grew up inside that massive house. I knew every single square foot of its polished hardwood floors. And as I looked around the glowing dining room, studying the faces of my relatives, the final piece of the ugly puzzle violently clicked into place. I suddenly understood exactly why 25 grown adults had actively looked the other way for 8 long years. It wasn't just blind ignorance. It was the invisible financial strings. My mother aggressively held everyone's purse strings. Cousin Tyler's expensive small business loan, Deanna had proudly co-signed it. Bella's massive down payment on her beautiful new suburban home, Deanna had happily written that fat check. Uncle Lenny's terrifying hospital bills from his surgery last year, Deanna quickly covered the steep deductible. She literally bought their absolute silence. She funded their required loyalty. Breaking ranks with Deanna didn't just mean awkwardly missing a sunny beach trip, it meant instantly losing your entire safety net. Mason's strong jaw tightened visibly beside me as he tracked my gaze. Layla was just quietly staring down at her untouched plate, trying to become invisible. I watched my mother smoothly butter a soft dinner roll, perfectly calm, entirely composed, confidently narrating a fake version of our family history where I had simply chosen to selfishly disappear. I let her finish buttering the bread. I let her finish her little fairy tale. Her reigning time was almost completely up. Right after the heavy main course, just before the sweet dessert was brought out, my mother elegantly stood up. She gracefully tapped her expensive crystal wine glass with a silver spoon. The sharp clink, clink, clink chimed brightly through the warm room, instantly commanding absolute silence. "I would love for us to go around the table," she announced warmly, "and share exactly what we are most thankful for this beautiful year." The little game started down at her end. Kevin mumbled something quick about good health. Bella predictably praised her 3 energetic boys. Tyler proudly mentioned his recent office promotion. Each person gave their required piece, short, warm, and painfully predictable. The forced gratitude made its steady way down the long mahogany surface like a slow, suffocating wave, inching closer and closer to my corner. Then it finally reached me. My mother's sharp eyes locked directly onto mine across the candles. I could clearly see it, the faint, nervous tightening around the corners of her painted mouth. She was rapidly calculating my mood. I slowly pushed my heavy wooden chair back. I stood up tall, I am incredibly thankful that every single person is sitting in this room tonight, I projected, making sure my voice easily reached the farthest corners. I paused. I let the heavy sentence land, hovering in the air. Because there is something I desperately need you all to hear. The entire atmosphere in the room instantly shifted. Shoulders straightened in confusion. Silver forks slowly went down. My mother's brilliant smile didn't just drop, it froze into a panicked, rigid line. "Gwen, sweetheart," she warned tightly, "this is really not the right time." "Mom, I have waited patiently for 8 agonizing years," I replied, my tone freezing the room. "There is absolutely no better time." I reached deep into my back pocket and pulled out my glowing phone. My mother's chair forcefully scraped against the dark hardwood as she stood up in a panic. "Gwen, don't. I want everyone at this table to hear exactly what my 8-year-old daughter asked me last October," I announced. 25 stunned faces turned completely toward me. Aunt Rose leaned forward, her brow furrowed deeply. Uncle Lenny slowly sat his white napkin down on his lap. Bella's husband cautiously placed a restraining hand on her trembling arm. Tyler's wife instinctively pulled their youngest toddler closer to her chest. My mother's voice dropped incredibly low, turning into a desperate, threatening hiss that only the room's dead silence allowed us to hear. "Put that phone away right now." I looked directly at her, holding her furious gaze without blinking. 8 years of suffocating silence. 8 summers of pathetic excuses. 8 years of watching my sweet daughter slowly learn she didn't belong. All of that buried pain pressed heavily into the charged space between us. "You had your chance to be honest, Mom," I stated flatly. "I offered you an open door 2 months ago. You angrily hung up on me." I pressed the glowing play button. This was the ultimate moment. 25 blood relatives were about to experience what my daughter had suffered alone. Layla's recorded voice suddenly filled the massive dining room. It sounded so incredibly small, shaking, and heartbreakingly innocent. "Grandma said the beach house is for real family. Mommy, why aren't we real family? Are we pretend?" Nobody breathed. Nobody moved a single muscle. The heavy furnace loudly clicked on somewhere deep in the basement. It was the only sound competing with my daughter's traumatized voice trembling through a tiny speaker, pressed hard against a fancy Christmas Eve tablecloth. Aunt Martha's wrinkled hand instantly flew up to cover her shocked mouth. Rose set her metal fork down with a loud ringing clink. My mother broke first. "That is completely out of context," she shouted, her pitch flying high and fast with raw panic. "Children misunderstand complicated things all the time. Gwen, turn that garbage off right this second." I didn't turn it off. I let the brutal recording play to the very bitter end. Layla crying, asking me over and over again if she was actually real, if she even counted as a person, if Grandma truly loved her, or if love was strictly reserved for the people who looked right. Uncle Lenny firmly held up a wide palm toward my panicking mother. "Diana, let her finish speaking. This is getting ridiculous." "I never," my mother sputtered wildly. "Mom," I interrupted, my voice perfectly level. I had practiced this exact moment in my bathroom mirror for 8 long weeks. "Layla tearfully told me what you said to her on the video call last July. I honestly thought maybe she misunderstood you. I prayed she did. So, I checked her tablet." Rose's head snapped sharply in my direction, her eyes wide with dawning horror. Martha slowly lowered her trembling hand from her pale mouth, and I swiped my thumb across the glowing screen, locking eyes with my mother as I prepared to unleash the final, undeniable weapon. The entire dining room held its collective breath. My mother's panicked eyes darted wildly toward Kevin, silently begging for help. Then to pale Bella, and finally to the large exit door right behind me. Kevin just stared deeply into his gravy plate. Bella sat frozen solid in her plush chair, her crystal glass of red wine suspended halfway to her shaking lips. My mother's flawless composure was rapidly slipping away. I could physically see it happening. The expensive painted mask was visibly shifting, the tightly woven edges of her fake reality violently coming undone right before my eyes. For 8 long years, she had confidently controlled every single casual conversation, heavily narrated every family event, and meticulously crafted every fake version of our lives. She couldn't magically control this one. Because this time, I literally possessed her actual voice. I slowly opened the second digital file and pressed the bright play button. The bright screen recording was slightly tilted on the glowing display. Layla had excitedly propped her heavy tablet onto a fluffy couch pillow, the exact clumsy way excited kids do. My mother's powdered face suddenly appeared in the tiny Skype window, her beautiful living room glowing warmly right behind her. She was wearing the exact same expensive pearl earrings she was wearing tonight. And then her sweet, unmistakable voice rang out, clear as a bell, perfectly captured, and secretly recorded without her knowledge by an innocent 8-year-old girl who didn't even realize the tiny red button was blinking. Sweetie, the beach house is strictly for our family, real family. Your daddy is different from us, you understand, right? The massive dining room didn't just quietly erupt in whispers, it completely imploded. Aunt Rose exhaled sharply, a ragged sound that sounded exactly like she had been brutally punched in the ribs. Martha slowly turned toward my panicking mother, and her wrinkled expression shifted into something I had never, ever seen on that famously gentle face before. Absolute disgust. "Deanna, is that truly your voice?" Martha demanded, her tone low and extremely dangerous. "That was taken completely out of context," my mother shrieked, her hands gripping the thick tablecloth like a lifeline. Rose's heavy chair shoved back forcibly, the wooden legs scraping loudly across the floor. Her angry voice cracked across the silent table like a thick branch suddenly snapping in half. "What possible context on this earth makes it acceptable to say that to an innocent 8-year-old child?" Rose roared. My mother frantically scanned the long table, desperately searching for a single loyal ally, a temporary foothold, absolutely anyone who would blindly throw her a protective rope. Kevin refused to look up from his cold plate. Bella had gone completely white, looking physically sick. Cousin Tyler's strong jaw was tightly clenched. I could visibly see a thick muscle jumping under his skin. Tyler finally spoke first. He raised a shaking hand. "Wait," he ordered, pointing a stiff finger directly at my trembling mother. "You have consistently told us for years that Gwen simply didn't want to come here. You loudly said she was always too busy. You said she stubbornly chose not to be a part of this family." He slowly turned his head to look at me, absorbing my silent pain, and then whipped back toward the head of the table. "That was a complete deliberate lie," Tyler stated flatly. My mother opened her painted mouth, snapped it shut, and then helplessly opened it again. Not a single word came out. She was drowning in the open air. And in that deafening silence, in that massive echoing gap between the generous matriarch she had pretended to be and the cruel monster the recording finally revealed, every single glowing story she had ever told about me violently unraveled at once. 25 grown adults heard her shiny kingdom collapse. Rose stood up sharply. She slammed her cloth napkin down onto the table like a final verdict. "I happily sat at that gorgeous beach house for 8 long summers, Diana," Rose hissed, her eyes blazing with raw betrayal. 8 years. I continuously asked you every single August why Gwenny wasn't there laughing with us. And you looked me directly in my eyes, over and over again, and you smoothly lied to my face. My mother's manicured hands were violently shaking now. She gripped the dark edge of the polished table to stay upright. "You don't understand how this works. This wealthy town, these people, they talk, they gossip. I was only trying to protect our family's good image." "Protect who?" Uncle Lenny leaned his large frame aggressively forward, pointing across the food. "Diana, she is your own flesh and blood granddaughter." Aunt Martha didn't utter another word. She didn't yell or throw a plate. She simply stood up from her chair, calmly walked across the room to the front coat closet, and pulled out her heavy winter jacket. Her loyal husband, Bob, silently followed her lead. They purposefully moved through the crowded room without a single backward glance. No dramatic yelling, no grand farewell speech. Just 2 deeply exhausted people who had absolutely heard enough poison for one lifetime. The heavy front door softly clicked completely shut behind them. It sounded incredibly louder than any screaming argument could have that night. Bella's trembling voice finally broke the stunned silence. She sounded incredibly small. "Mom, did you actually say that to Layla?" she whispered. My mother whipped her head toward Bella, the beloved golden child, the final safe harbor in the storm. The raw desperation twisting my mother's face was almost enough to make me look away in pity. Almost. "Bella, please, you have to understand the complicated pressure I was under," my mother pleaded, her voice cracking. But Bella wasn't even looking at her anymore. She was staring directly at Layla, my beautiful, confused daughter, sitting bravely between Mason and me, her tiny hand gripping my sweater sleeve, silently watching her own grandmother completely fall apart in front of a room full of strangers she had been wrongly taught to call family. "Oh my God," Bella gasped softly, finally understanding the depth of the cruelty. At the very opposite end of the long table, my quiet father finally spoke his first actual words of the entire chaotic evening. "I repeatedly warned you this terrible day would happen." My mother spun wildly toward him. "Kevin, stop just sitting there. Help me. Say something right now to fix this." He slowly picked up his tall crystal water glass, took a long, slow sip, and carefully set it back down on the coaster. "I warned you, Diana. For years I warned you to stop." I didn't need to say another word. I truly didn't. The damning recording had already said absolutely everything I had been desperately screaming for 8 years, and the entire room had finally heard every single devastating syllable. I stood up slowly. I was in absolutely no rush now. "Layla, go get your warm coat, baby," I said softly, smoothing her hair. "We are finally going home." Mason was already on his feet, holding Layla's little hand, but my mother wasn't ready to let me walk out of the burning house that easily. My mother's panicked voice chased me frantically across the dining room. "Gwen, you absolutely cannot leave like this. We need to talk. We need to sit down right now as a family." I stopped mid-step. I slowly turned and looked back at her across the incredible length of that polished mahogany table. I looked past the abandoned dinner plates, the untouched chocolate pudding, and the warm gravy nobody would ever finish. "Mom," I said, my voice completely steady, "we have talked for 8 long years. We have talked. You consciously chose to lie. I am choosing to leave." She desperately started to respond, but nothing formed. Her painted mouth just moved around empty silence. It is finally over, I thought, the heavy, invisible chains snapping off my chest. On the quick way to the front door, I passed Aunt Rose. She reached out and caught my hand. Her palm was incredibly warm, her eyes rimmed entirely red with unshed tears. She didn't try to stop me or beg me to stay. She just squeezed my fingers firmly. "I am so deeply sorry I didn't see it sooner," she whispered quietly. "You couldn't," I replied gently. She made absolutely sure of that. Rose let go, nodded her head, and angrily wiped her wet cheek with the back of her hand. Outside, the fresh winter air hit us like a solid brick wall. It was a clean, sharp, beautiful December cold. It tasted exactly like pure freedom. Mason quickly unlocked the car. I gently buckled Layla into her booster seat. She looked up at me, her wide brown eyes anxiously searching my face. "Mommy, is Grandma going to be really mad at us?" I crouched down to her eye level and softly smoothed her dark hair back from her forehead. "She is terrified of the monster I just slayed. Grandma is going to feel exactly what she made you feel, sweetheart," I promised her softly. "And that is absolutely not your fault." Mason started the engine. We pulled out of the crowded driveway. In the rearview mirror, the massive colonial house glowed brightly behind us. Warm, golden light spilled through every single window, full of 25 people. For the very first time in 8 long years, I didn't wish I was inside. Layla fell fast asleep in the warm car 30 minutes into the dark drive. Her mouth hung slightly open, her little head tilted against the cool glass window, one tiny hand still curled safely around the seatbelt strap. Mason and I drove in total silence. It wasn't an uncomfortable, tense quiet. It was the peaceful kind of silence that only comes after something massive happens, when your racing brain hasn't quite caught up with your beating heart yet. Then, my phone lit up the dark console before we even hit the main highway. Rose called me first. "I left right behind you," she breathed into the receiver. "Martha and Bob went straight home too. Lenny is still sitting there, but he is completely refusing to speak to your mother. She is just sitting alone at the head of the table. Kevin hasn't moved an inch." A heavy pause. "Are you okay, Gwenny?" "I am okay," I answered honestly. "I am absolutely furious," Rose cried out. 8 years. I blindly believed her for 8 years. Cousin Tyler texted me at 8:15 p.m. "Gwen, I had absolutely no idea. None. Layla is our family, period. I am so deeply sorry I wasn't paying closer attention." Then cousins I barely even remembered started rapidly reaching out. People who had sat comfortably at that table, blindly swallowing my mother's fake version for years, were now frantically recalculating every conversation, every weak excuse, and every single holiday I had ever missed. Bella called me at 10 o'clock. She was violently crying. It wasn't her usual performative, victim crying. It was the raw, ugly, soul-crushing kind. "Why didn't you just tell me?" she sobbed hysterically. "I tried to tell you, Bella. After the phone call, after every single argument, you happily chose Mom's comfortable version over my painful truth." She went completely quiet on the line for a very long time. I could only hear her ragged breathing. "I know," she finally whispered. "Just that." My mother aggressively called my phone 14 separate times between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. I didn't pick up a single one. Mason brought me a steaming mug of chamomile tea and sat closely beside me on the living room couch. "So, what exactly happens now?" he asked. Now I took a sip of the hot tea. I officially set the boundary. At exactly 3:15 a.m., a final, vicious text from my mother lit up my nightstand. "You completely destroyed this family." I read the glowing words, calmly set the phone face down, and closed my eyes. I slept better that night than I had in nearly a decade. The social fallout moved incredibly fast. It was a rapid-fire sequence of brutally severed ties. One text, then a phone call, then the absolute deafening silence. 6 days, 6 massive fractures. Day 1. Rose called my mother. I don't know the exact angry words that were exchanged, but Rose told me afterward she made one strict rule completely clear. She would not attend any family event my mother ever organized until Diana delivered a sincere apology to both me and Layla. Not a lazy text message. Not a cowardly voicemail. Face to face. Day 2. A thick envelope arrived. It was a handwritten letter from Aunt Martha. 4 heavy, ink-stained pages. She wrote deeply about her own mother, a bitter woman who had aggressively played favorites among her children and carried that toxic poison straight to her grave. But on page 3, Martha revealed her own dark, tragic secret. The real reason she had walked out of the dining room so silently. 30 long years ago, my mother had done the exact same cruel thing to Martha's adopted daughter. She maliciously excluded her, whispered behind her back about her not being real blood, and systematically pushed the poor girl out of all the family photos. Martha wrote that she had stayed cowardly quiet back then because she was absolutely terrified of the family backlash. She foolishly let her daughter endure the agonizing pain. "I have wished I had spoken up 50 years ago," Martha's shaky handwriting read. "You bravely broke a vicious cycle I was too much of a coward to break, Gwen. I owe you and sweet Layla my life." Martha and her husband stopped returning my mother's frantic phone calls that exact same afternoon. Day 3. Tyler quietly removed my mother from the massive family group chat. He didn't care about the remaining balance on his business loan anymore. He was officially done being bought. He didn't make a grand announcement, he just deleted her contact. When she texted him privately, demanding to know what happened, he replied with one simple sentence. "You know exactly what happened." Day 4. 3 more households, distant cousins on my father's side, quietly declined the standing, mandatory invitation to New Year's Eve at my mother's house. Day 5. 4 entire households were officially gone. Day 6. The famous annual New Year's gathering, the shiny event my mother had proudly hosted without a single interruption for 25 years, was suddenly, completely cancelled. My mother desperately tried to regain her lost control. She frantically called everyone, every single aunt, every uncle, every distant cousin. But the massive problem with audio recordings is that they simply do not change. They never magically soften with a new retelling. They don't stretch to accommodate a brand new, comfortable version of events. Every person she tearfully called had already heard her own crisp voice saying those monstrous words. There was absolutely nothing left to rewrite. 6 people walked away in 6 days. Not because I angrily asked them to leave her. Not because I aggressively campaigned, lobbied, or made selfish demands. They left because they finally heard the undeniable truth. And the truth was more than enough. But the biggest, most crushing consequence didn't even come from our family. Shiloh is a very small town. 15,000 people, exactly 5 stoplights, and 1 crowded grocery store where everybody constantly runs into everybody. Gossipy word travels around here exactly the way a bad storm does. You don't see it coming, but suddenly, the wind is everywhere, Rose told her best friend in confidence. Her best friend casually told someone at the weekly church auxiliary meeting. By the very next Sunday morning, the explosive story had reached Pastor Carter at Grace Methodist Church. My mother wasn't officially fired. That is not how polite churches work in tiny towns like Shiloh. But Pastor Carter quietly called her into his private office after the morning sermon. He gently suggested she step entirely back from her powerful role as the head of the hospitality committee. A much-needed rest, he kindly called it. A slight leadership restructuring. Every single person in the pews knew exactly what it really meant. For 25 long years, that specific church committee had been my mother's absolute kingdom. She proudly organized the massive potlucks, the lucrative charity fundraisers, and the busy community breakfasts. She strictly decided who brought what dish and who sat at what table. It was a seemingly small thing, just a volunteer committee in a small town, but it was the entire foundation of everything she had successfully built. It was her identity, her public standing, the exact reason people called her Diana with deep respect instead of just casual recognition. That massive foundation permanently cracked in a single week. Her entire fake kingdom was officially in absolute ruins. But the most painful blow of all was about to come from the one person who had stayed completely silent the longest. My father finally called me the following Wednesday. His voice was completely flat, sounding exactly like a tired, defeated man reading from a hollow script he didn't even write. "Your mother cries all day long," he muttered into the receiver, his tone heavy with misplaced blame. "Are you happy now?" He watched her do it, I thought, my chest burning with a sudden, fierce pity. He sat at that table for 8 years and let it happen. "Dad," I answered, my voice steady but razor-sharp. "My innocent daughter cried for months alone in her dark bedroom. Did you ever once call to ask about her?" The phone line just hummed with empty, dead silence. He had absolutely no answer to give. He softly hung up. 4 days later, Bella dialed my number again. This time, her voice was entirely different. It was much steadier, completely stripped of its usual drama, but it carried a sharp, terrified edge I had never heard before. "Gwen, I desperately need to ask you something," Bella whispered. Did she ever say anything cruel like that about my kids?" "I don't know, Bella," I answered honestly. "I genuinely don't, but you finally know that she is fully capable of it." I didn't need to say another word. The heavy silence between us said it all. Bella had just answered her own terrifying question. The monster doesn't have loyalty. The monster only has moods. 3 quiet weeks after that explosive Christmas Eve, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was handwritten on my mother's expensive cream stationery, the heavy textured paper she strictly uses for polite thank you notes and formal sympathy cards. I sat alone at the sunlit kitchen table, tracing her careful, elegant penmanship, and finally opened it. "Dear Gwen," it read, "I am sorry if you were hurt by what happened. I love Layla. I have always loved Layla. But you have to understand, I grew up in a completely different time. Things were different back then. People in this community have certain strict expectations, and I was simply trying to navigate that the very best I could. I hope in time you can finally understand that everything I did came straight from a place of love. Your mother." I read the expensive paper twice. Then I calmly set it down on the wood and went to brew a fresh pot of coffee. Here is what I know about true apologies. They always start with raw accountability. "I am sorry I did this to you," not, "I am sorry if you were hurt." The first sentence bravely owns the terrible action. The second sentence cowardly blames you for having a natural human reaction. My mother's elegant letter wasn't a real apology. It was a calculated public relations release. I wrote her back. I kept it incredibly short. There was no screaming anger in my pen, just crystal clear boundaries. "Mom, I absolutely do not need you to understand my beautiful marriage. I do not need you to ever agree with my life choices. I just need you to never, ever speak to my sweet daughter that way again until you can bravely acknowledge what you said. You must take full responsibility for it and commit to professional family counseling. Until then, we will not be visiting. The door is standing wide open whenever you are finally ready to walk through it." Honestly, she received my firm letter on a rainy Thursday. By Saturday morning, she had aggressively forwarded a copy of it to Bella. She had dramatically highlighted my words and furiously scribbled angry notes in the margins. She had drawn a massive red circle around the phrase, "We won't be visiting," and written next to it, "See, she is maliciously punishing me." Bella immediately called me. "Mom just sent me your private letter." "I figured she probably would," I sighed. "She desperately wants you to talk me out of it." "Are you going to try?" I asked, bracing myself for the usual fight. A long, beautiful pause stretched over the phone line. "No," Bella said firmly. "No, I'm not. First time for everything." 5 peaceful months after Christmas Eve, Mason and I hosted a lively backyard barbecue. It was a gorgeous Sunday in early April. It was one of those perfect early spring days where the golden sun is wonderfully warm on your skin, but the passing wind still carries a tiny, refreshing bite. We cheerfully set up long wooden tables right in the green grass. We strung bright, glowing fairy lights between the tall wooden fence posts. Mason happily grilled thick burgers and juicy hot dogs. It was absolutely nothing fancy, and that was exactly the beautiful point. Aunt Rose came early, carrying a massive bowl of fruit. Uncle Lenny and Gentle Martha arrived right behind her. Cousin Tyler brought his entire loud, laughing family. And then Bella showed up. She walked through the wooden gate tentatively, stepping carefully like someone testing the thin ice on a frozen pond. But she actually showed up. Her 3 wild boys instantly ran straight for the open backyard, tackling Tyler's kids into the soft grass. Even Chloe came. And for the very first time in her teenage life, she wasn't proudly looking down her nose at my daughter. Chloe walked shyly up to Layla and handed her a beautiful peace offering, a brand new, colorful beadcraft kit. Layla was right in the vibrant center of all of it. She was happily chasing cousins she had barely even known 8 short months ago. She was laughing, a full, open, unrestrained sound, the pure kind of laugh that starts deep in a child's belly and echoes beautifully across the yard. At one point, she eagerly grabbed Tyler's youngest toddler by his chubby little hand, and they completely disappeared behind our garage for 25 minutes, proudly building a secret fort out of fallen sticks and dark mulch. Mason stood closely next to me on the wooden porch, casually flipping a spatula, just watching the beautiful chaos. "She is okay," he murmured, his dark eyes shining with quiet pride. "She is perfectly okay, Gwen, because now she finally knows exactly where she belongs." He wrapped his strong, warm arm tightly around my tired shoulders. We just stood perfectly still like that for a long, quiet while. This is what real peace feels like, I thought. It is loud, it is messy, and it is entirely ours. My mother wasn't there. My father wasn't either. I never permanently banned them from our lives. I simply set basic human conditions, apologized to Layla directly, acknowledged the deep pain you caused, attend family counseling. 3 incredibly simple steps. Clear, measurable, fair. It was the exact same basic framework I would use to correct a misbehaving student in my 3rd grade classroom. My mother stubbornly refused. "I will not be put on trial by my own daughter," she had declared. I peacefully accepted that final answer, not because it was the morally right one, but because the tragic decision was entirely hers to make. I lovingly built the door. I bravely held it wide open. She simply chose not to walk through it. I didn't cruelly cut my mother off. I just honestly told her what the safe way back looked like. She stubbornly decided the emotional price was far too high, and that is absolutely not my heavy burden to carry anymore. I am not telling you this painful story so you will instantly cut off your own family. I am certainly not telling it so you will secretly record someone and dramatically play it at a tense holiday dinner. Every single family situation is totally different, and I do not know yours. I am passionately telling you this because it took me 8 agonizing years to finally learn something that should have been absolutely obvious from the very start. Silence in the presence of someone actively hurting your child is never peacekeeping. It is permission. I foolishly told myself I was fiercely protecting Layla by keeping my mouth shut. I thought that if I just managed the toxic behavior carefully enough, if I gracefully dodged the fake invitations, if I silently swallowed the bitter lies, and if I just forced a smile through the fake Instagram photos, she would never have to know the ugly truth. But innocent children always know. They always feel it. They sense the cold, empty chair at the dinner table long before any adult awkwardly explains why it is empty. My sweet daughter asked me one single, shattering question. "Why does Grandma say we're not real family?" That innocent question didn't suddenly break anything. It only bravely revealed what was already permanently broken. And it finally gave me the desperate clarity I needed to stop pretending those massive, ugly cracks weren't there. If you are currently sitting exactly where I was 8 years ago, quietly knowing the awful truth, but nervously waiting for the perfect moment, the undeniable proof, or the right excuse to finally act, I desperately want you to hear this. The right moment is the exact moment your innocent child starts to truly believe the terrible lie. Last Tuesday afternoon, Layla skipped home from school holding a brand new crinkled family portrait. She had proudly drawn it during her free time. It was incredibly messy, vibrantly bright, and absolutely wonderful. There was Gwen, Mason, and Layla standing proudly right in the center. But we weren't alone anymore. We were completely surrounded by a smiling Aunt Rose, a tall Uncle Lenny, a gentle Aunt Martha, Tyler, Bella, and a full dozen energetic cousins she now sees on a regular basis. She held the precious paper high up in the air, beaming with absolute pride. "Look, Mommy, I drew our whole family." "Wow," I whispered, my eyes suddenly burning with happy tears. "That is a really big family, sweetie." She grinned so wide her eyes crinkled. "It's the real one." I pulled her tightly into my arms and kissed the top of her head. "Yeah, baby, it absolutely is. That is my long journey. If you have ever been forced to painfully choose between desperately keeping the fake peace and fiercely protecting your innocent child, I would absolutely love to hear from you. Please, drop your own story down in the comments below. And if you are sitting there right now, staring at your screen, quietly wondering whether you are crazy or overreacting to how your toxic family treats you or your beautiful kids, you are probably not. Trust that deep gut feeling. Type the word boundaries in the comments if this one hit close to your home. If you want more real stories like this, stories about bravely standing up, drawing hard lines in the sand, and finally choosing your own pure peace over someone else's toxic comfort, check the description for more videos. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and I will safely see you in the very next one. Thank you so much for bravely staying with me.